That $30,000 fine hit me harder than a fist, the crumpled paper smacking against my face as I floated in the cool waters of my own lake. Droplets ran down the page while Karen Whitfield's sharp voice sliced through the Sunday, calm like a rusty blade through tin. "Daniel Carter," she called, her tone dripping with false authority. "You're swimming illegally on HOA property. You're endangering our entire community." Behind her stood 3 so-called officers, lined up like plastic action figures bought from a bargain bin. Their knockoff uniforms gleamed in the sun, but the shine couldn't hide how fake they were, the happy laughter of children echoing. Across the lake froze in an instant. 8 autistic kids, the ones I'd been teaching to swim for months, went silent. Their little hands clutched foam noodles, eyes wide, as if they could feel the danger before a word was spoken. The scene was so surreal I could hardly process it. The gentle splash of water against the dock, the steady buzz of a lawnmower in the distance, and the smoky sweetness of the Martinez family's barbecue. All of it clashed against the absurd picture of these imposters barking commands at me. "In my grandfather's lake." "Sir, you need to get out of the water immediately and come with us to the station," the leader barked, puffing out his chest like a mall cop on a power trip. But I knew better. Their uniforms didn't fit right. Their badges were as generic as carnival prizes. Not a single one carried a working radio or weapon. I'd been around enough real law enforcement during my tours in Afghanistan to spot fakes from 50 yards away. These weren't officers. They were actors in a bad play. What they also didn't know was that tucked into the lining of my swim shorts was a tiny military-grade beacon. One press of the button, and my old SWAT buddy, Lieutenant Walker, would be inbound in under 15 minutes. I'd used tech like this in real war zones, coordinating air support while mortars rained down around me. Staying calm under fire was second nature now, and these clowns were nothing compared to that. And then there was Karen Whitfield herself. HOA president, community menace, a woman in her pressed blazer and smug expression, clutching a folder full of what I suspected were more fake papers. Her story was tragic once. She'd moved into our lakeside neighborhood broken and bitter, having lost her house to another HOA in another state. I'd pitied her back then, watching her slowly stitch her life back together. But somehow, instead of healing, she'd twisted. The victim had become the abuser, copying the cruelty of those who'd once destroyed her. The irony wasn't lost on me. But pity only stretches so far, especially when she's threatening the very kids who had finally found a place to feel safe. This wasn't just swimming, it was healing. Swim to heal had become my mission after the service. I'd seen miracles in that water. Tommy Stone, once terrified of even dipping his face, now swam full laps. Javier Martinez, who struggled with words, had found rhythm and calm in the steady strokes of swimming. These kids weren't just learning to swim, they were finding freedom, and every single lesson took place on my property in my lake, passed down 3 generations. It wasn't hers. It wasn't the HOA's. And it sure as hell wasn't subject to her fake authority. Karen, though, had made the lake her obsession. She ranted about environmental damage, about unlicensed therapy, about risks to children. But I knew it was all smoke. This wasn't about safety. This was about control, power. Her hunger for it had rotted her from the inside. Meanwhile, my daughter Emily was crouched in the willow trees, phone in hand, live streaming everything to her. 50-odd followers. She was 12, sharp as a blade, and had already mastered what most adults hadn't, how to make truth go viral. Her finger hovered near the emergency contact app we'd rehearsed again and again during the worst months of my PTSD. If Dad's in trouble, film everything, call the cavalry, and now her little stream was catching fire. Parents from across, the community, and even outside it, were watching the scene play out live. Instead of panicking, I played it tactical. I swam further from shore, well beyond their reach, and raised my voice so Emily's camera would catch it. I'd like to. See your warrant officers, I said coolly. Badge numbers, department ID, go ahead and provide them. The fake cops stiffened. Cracks formed in their paper-thin performance. Eyes darted nervously. Their fake authority was crumbling under the weight of a simple question. Karen's face flushed red, her composure unraveling. "Haul him up right now!" she shrieked. "Use force if you must!" But Marcus Webb, their so-called leader, froze. Even fake cops knew better than to rough up a veteran in front of children, and especially not in front of a live stream audience. That was my cue. Underwater, I pressed the beacon. A quiet click, and the encrypted signal shot out across the ether, pinging Lieutenant Walker's emergency response unit. The same tech once used to extract soldiers from hostile zones was now calling in backup for me, here in my own backyard. Karen had no idea she'd just declared war on someone who actually knew how to fight one. Minutes later, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors began rolling across the lake. I leaned back, still floating, and allowed myself the smallest grin as I watched the color drain from the imposters' faces. "Ma'am," Marcus Webb stammered, voice shaking. "He's asking for warrants. Backup is on the way. Maybe we should—" Karen, cut him off with venom. "I don't care who he called. This ends today." The black SWAT helicopter descended right on my dock, 15 minutes sharp. Its rotors whipped the lake into chaos, sending Karen and her fake squad stumbling. Out stepped Lieutenant Walker, tactical gear gleaming, his team of 5 moving with the precision only real operators carry. Walker and I had shared dust, blood, and chaos back in Afghanistan. Now he ran the county's veteran emergency response program, a lifeline for men like me who sometimes needed real backup in civilian life. That beacon wasn't just a gadget. It was part of a system built to keep us from falling through the cracks. "Danny boy," Walker called, his voice warm even in the storm of blades and wind. "Didn't think I'd see you back in the excitement. Business." Then his eyes hardened, scanning the imposters, the trembling kids in the lake, the smug woman with her folder. "Ma'am," he said icily to Karen, "I'll need identification from your officers." Marcus Webb nearly choked on his words. His cheap badge glinted as he muttered, "We're just private security, sir. Mrs. Whitfield hired us. Community safety." The confession landed like a bomb. And meanwhile, Emily's live stream exploded. 15,000 viewers, hashtags firing, fake police scam trending by the second. Karen's empire of intimidation was collapsing in real time, yet she didn't flinch. She pivoted. That's who she was. In seconds, she was on the phone with Channel 7, painting herself as the hero. "I was only protecting children from a dangerous, unstable veteran," she cried to the reporter, her voice quivering on cue, tears flashing in her eyes. "She twisted my service into a weapon against me. My PTSD, my scars, my sacrifice, all spun into evidence that I was a threat. It was masterful manipulation, the kind only a true con artist could pull off." By the time the news crew arrived, followed by neighbors and rubberneckers drawn by the viral stream, the lakeside had become a circus. Karen played ringmaster, feeding the cameras lies, but she didn't know Walker's body cam was recording every second. She didn't know Marcus Webb had already started confessing under interrogation. "Mrs. Whitfield paid us $500 each," he admitted shakily. "Told us to dress up, act tough, scare the veteran. The uniforms came from some website overseas. Badges were fake. None of it was real. Plastic badges, cheap uniforms, a theater of lies. All of it captured on federal body cam, ready to hold up in court." And yet, even as her hired muscle cracked under pressure, Karen didn't stop. She doubled down, spinning faster, louder, wilder, waving new documents, claiming environmental contamination, psychological reports, parent complaints, anything to drag my name through the mud. Of course, I had never seen a single one of those papers, had never been evaluated or complained about. But Karen presented them with the confidence of someone who'd learned that in the age of social media, perception often matters more than truth. The community was already dividing. Some neighbors nodded along with her performance, while others looked skeptical at the SWAT team treating me like an ally rather than a threat. Lieutenant Walker pulled me aside while his team processed the fake cops and their equipment. "Danny, this is bigger than just some HOA power trip," he said quietly. "These uniforms, this level of organization, it smells like organized fraud to me. You need to be careful, watch your back, and maybe lawyer up." He handed me a card for a civil rights attorney, someone who specialized in cases where local authorities overstepped their bounds. Lisa Collins handles these kinds of situations, helped a lot of veterans who got railroaded by bureaucrats and bullies. As the SWAT team prepared to leave, Karen was already planning her next move, whispering urgently with someone on her phone while shooting venomous glares in my direction. The chaos finally died down as evening approached. Neighbors drifting back to their homes, news crews packing up their equipment, fake cops heading to county lockup for processing. But as I helped Emily upload her footage to multiple platforms, ensuring it couldn't be scrubbed or suppressed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A black sedan with tinted windows sat at the end of our street, and through my military-grade binoculars, I could make out the license plate, Emerald 1. Karen walked over to that car after everyone else had left, leaning down to speak with someone inside, her body language suddenly submissive rather than commanding. Whatever conversation they were having, it was brief and intense, and when she walked away, her expression had shifted from frustrated anger to cold determination. The voice that drifted from the car's open window was male, cultured, and carried an accent I couldn't quite place. Phase 2 begins now. Karen destroy his reputation completely. 48 hours later, I was served with legal papers that made Karen's fake fine look like pocket change. HOA Homeowners versus Daniel Carter demanded $500,000 in damages for operating an unlicensed business, environmental contamination, and endangering minors. The lawyer's name at the bottom, Robert Steinberg, rang bells from my research into high-stakes property litigation. This wasn't some small-town attorney. This was a heavyweight who specialized in crushing homeowners who dared to challenge HOA authority. But instead of intimidating me, the escalation told me everything I needed to know about Karen's desperation and the resources she had backing her. Real money was involved here. The kind that could afford Steinberg's 1,000-per-hour fees and orchestrate a media blitz designed to destroy my reputation before I could mount a defense. Karen's media strategy was surgical in its precision, hitting 3 local television stations within 24 hours with carefully crafted sob stories about community safety and environmental protection. She appeared on Channel 7's morning show with glossy folders full of what looked like scientific reports pointing to charts and graphs that supposedly proved my lake was a toxic hazard. "We've identified dangerous bacterial contamination," she announced, with practiced concern. "And Mr. Carter has refused all requests for independent testing." Of course, she'd never actually requested any testing, but the audience didn't know that. By noon, she was on Channel 12's midday program, this time focusing on my military background as a liability rather than an asset. Veterans with untreated PTSD pose risks to vulnerable populations, she said, citing statistics from studies that probably didn't exist. These children need professional therapy, not amateur swimming lessons from someone who refuses psychological evaluation. The psychological warfare was masterful, turning my greatest strengths into perceived weaknesses, while painting herself as the voice of reason and child protection. She'd hired a PR firm. That much was obvious from the coordinated messaging and professional production values of her media appearances. Each interview followed the same script: emotional appeals mixed with pseudo-scientific jargon designed to sound authoritative to casual viewers. By the third day, number Shutdown Daniel was trending alongside number Save Swim to Heal. Our community splitting into wearing factions based on 30-second sound bites and manipulated footage. The parents who'd seen their children thrive in my program were fighting back on social media, but Karen's professional PR machine was drowning them out with manufactured outrage and astroturfed concerned trolling. That's when I decided to take risks that would have made my military commanders proud or court-martial me depending on how they turned out. Late one night, I slipped into the HOA office building using skills I'd learned in urban warfare, not to steal anything, but to photograph public records that Karen might be hiding or manipulating. The financial discrepancies I discovered made my blood run cold. Over $180,000 had been transferred from the Community Development Fund to something called legal expenses in the past 6 months, with Margaret Stone's signature on every authorization. But Margaret had told me she'd never approved such massive expenditures, which meant either she was lying or someone was forging her signature on official HOA documents. The evidence was damning, but getting it had required climbing fences, picking locks, and evading security cameras in ways that would definitely be illegal. If I hadn't been careful to only photograph documents that were technically public records as I downloaded the images to an encrypted drive, I heard footsteps in the hallway and had to make a tactical withdrawal through a bathroom window, landing in thorny bushes that left me looking like I'd wrestled with a wildcat. Emily found the whole thing hilarious when I explained my injuries the next morning, but she also understood the seriousness of what I'd discovered. "Dad, this isn't just about our lake anymore, is it?" she asked, her 12-year-old mind grasping implications that most adults would miss. While I was gathering intelligence on Karen's financial crimes, she was escalating her personal attacks in ways that made me question whether she was entirely sane. Sarah Martinez, the mother of Javier, one of my most successful therapy students, received a visit from Karen offering $5,000 if she'd publicly claim I'd been inappropriate with her son. Sarah's horrified rejection of the bribe should have ended it, but Karen simply moved on to other parents with similar offers, apparently believing that everyone had a price. When that didn't work, she switched tactics, calling Child Protective Services with anonymous reports that I was operating an unlicensed daycare and exposing children to dangerous conditions. The CPS investigation was brief but thorough, with their social worker spending an entire afternoon observing my program and interviewing the children and their parents. Mr. Carter, the investigator, told me afterward, "These are some of the happiest, most well-adjusted special needs children I've ever encountered. Whatever you're doing here is working." But Karen spun even that vindication into a negative, telling anyone who'd listened that I'd obviously coached the children and bribed the investigator. Her capacity for turning truth into lies was breathtaking, and I was beginning to understand that I wasn't dealing with a garden-variety HOA tyrant, but someone whose grip on reality had been fundamentally damaged by whatever had happened to her in the past. The breaking point came when I decided to challenge Robert Steinberg to a public debate about the merits of their case. "If you're so confident in your legal position," I told him during a recorded phone call that Emily live-reamed, "then defend it, publicly. Let the community hear both sides and decide for themselves." His refusal was immediate and telling, too quick for someone who supposedly held all the cards. That refusal, combined with the financial irregularities I discovered, gave me the ammunition I needed to approach Margaret Stone directly. But first, I had to figure out whether she was complicit in Karen's schemes or another victim being manipulated by forces beyond her understanding. Approaching Margaret Stone required the kind of tactical planning I'd used in hostile territory. Because Karen's private investigators were watching my every move like hawks circling wounded prey, I'd spotted the same gray Honda following me to the grocery store 3 times. And Emily had noticed a man with a telephoto lens camped across from our house pretending to read newspapers. So, when I saw Margaret loading groceries into her Subaru at the Whole Foods parking lot, used old military hand signals to communicate a meeting location, tapping my watch and pointing toward the abandoned fishing dock behind Miller's Marina. Margaret's eyes widened with recognition and fear, but she nodded almost imperceptibly before driving away. 20 years of military training had taught me that sometimes the most dangerous missions required the quietest approaches. And Margaret Stone was about to become either my greatest ally or the person who'd hand Karen everything she needed to destroy me. The meeting itself felt like a scene from a Cold War thriller. Margaret arriving at the dock after sunset with her headlights off and her hands shaking as she approached my position in the shadows. "Daniel, I'm so scared," she whispered before I could even say hello. Karen has been forging my signature on financial documents for months, maybe years. "I only found out when you mentioned those transfers during your phone call yesterday." Her confession tumbled out in a rush of guilt and terror. How she'd discovered copies of documents in Karen's office bearing her name but not her handwriting. How Karen had been using Margaret's position as treasurer to legitimize massive fund transfers without oversight or approval. "She's stolen over $300,000 from our community, Daniel, and she set me up to take the fall if anyone investigates." But Margaret's revelations went far beyond simple embezzlement, exposing a conspiracy that stretched from our lakeside community all the way to international corporate boardrooms. Karen had signed a secret agreement with Emerald Bay Development Corporation, a Canadian firm specializing in luxury resort properties, to sell them exclusive development rights to our entire lakefront area. The plan was breathtaking in its audacity, converting our quiet residential community into a $50 million wellness resort, complete with spa facilities, conference centers, and vacation rentals that would price out every current resident. She showed me "the architectural renderings, Daniel," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "They want to build an 8-story hotel right where your lake is now, calling it the centerpiece of their Emerald Waters Resort and Spa." The personal stakes became devastatingly clear when Margaret revealed the true reason for her cooperation with my investigation. Her 14-year-old son, Tommy, who'd been diagnosed with autism 3 years earlier, had found transformation and confidence through my Swim to Heal program. "Before your therapy sessions, Tommy couldn't make eye contact with strangers or speak in complete sentences," Margaret explained through tears. "Now he's talking about becoming a swimming instructor himself, maybe even competing in the Special Olympics. You saved my son, Daniel, and now I have to help save your program from the woman who's been manipulating both of us." The realization that Karen's scheme would destroy not just my property, but the therapeutic refuge that had helped dozens of special needs children added a layer of moral outrage that made this fight about something much larger than property rights or personal vendettas. Margaret agreed to become a double agent in our war against Karen's corruption, but the risks were enormous for both of us. She'd wear a recording device during HO meetings and private conversations with Karen, gathering evidence of the fraud and conspiracy that could stand up in federal court. But if Karen discovered the deception, Margaret could face criminal charges as an alleged co-conspirator, and her family could lose everything they'd worked to build. "I'm willing to take that risk," Margaret said with quiet determination. "Tommy deserves a future where bullies like Karen can't destroy the things that help him thrive." We spent 2 hours that night planning our strategy, working out communication, protocols, and emergency procedures that would protect her cover while gathering the evidence we needed to expose Karen's crimes to federal authorities. The first recording session yielded intelligence that exceeded our wildest expectations, Karen's desperation and arrogance combining to produce a confession that would make any prosecutor's career. When Margaret confronted her about the forged signatures, during what Karen thought was a private meeting, Karen broke down completely and admitted everything. "I had no choice, Margaret. The casino debts were crushing me, and the Emerald Bay people promised me $7.5 million if I could deliver this community to them. They said the resort would bring prosperity to everyone. But first, we had to remove obstacles like Daniel and his ridiculous therapy program." Their recording captured not only Karen's admission of fraud and forgery, but also her revelation that she owned 15% of Thersort Development, making her financial crimes a federal matter involving interstate commerce and foreign investment. But Our intelligence gathering operation was about to become a life-or-death situation when Karen's paranoia finally overcame her arrogance. During their third recorded conversation, Margaret asked too many specific questions about the Emerald Bay timeline, arousing Karen's suspicions enough to make her physically search Margaret for recording devices. The discovery of the wire triggered a chase scene that could have come from an action movie. Margaret fleeing Karen's office with the crucial evidence while Karen and Marcus Webb, who apparently hadn't learned his lesson from the fake police debacle, pursued her through the community. Center parking lot. Margaret made it to my house with minutes to spare. Karen's car screeching to a halt at my driveway as I helped Margaret inside and immediately called Lieutenant Walker for emergency backup. The recordings we'd gathered provided everything we needed to contact federal authorities directly, but Karen's discovery of our operation meant we were now in immediate physical danger. FBI agent Patricia Green returned my call within 2 hours, her voice carrying the kind of excitement that comes from stumbling onto a case that could make or break a career. Mr. Carter, your information has been connected to an ongoing investigation. We've been conducting into Emerald Bay Development Corporation for the past 3 months. We've been waiting for someone with access to their local operations, and it sounds like Mrs. Whitfield just handed us everything we need to bring down a multi-state property fraud ring. But even as federal law enforcement prepared to swoop in and arrest the conspirators, Karen was making one final desperate play that would put an innocent child directly in harm's way. Late that night, my phone rang with a call that turned my blood to ice water. Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper, filled with the kind of terror that only comes from a parent whose child is in mortal danger. Daniel, they took Tommy from school. Karen says, if I don't publicly denounce you and destroy all the evidence, I'll never see my son again. The abandoned Emerald Bay construction site looked like a fortress of rust and shadows when Lieutenant Walker and I approached it. At 3 in the morning, using night vision equipment and tactical coordination that felt like Afghanistan all over again. Margaret's panicked phone call had triggered every protective instinct I developed during years of combat. But this time, the mission was personal in ways that made me hands shake with rage rather than adrenaline. Tommy Stone wasn't just another hostage. He was a 14-year-old boy with autism who'd learned to trust the world through swimming lessons, and Karen Whitfield had violated that trust in the most evil way imaginable. Walker's SWAT team surrounded the half-built resort structure while I approached from the water-eyed, using skills I'd hoped never to need again in civilian life. The irony wasn't lost on me that Karen's greed had led us to the very site where she planned to destroy my lake and build her monument to corruption. The rescue itself unfolded with military precision, but the intelligence we gathered during the operation revealed a conspiracy so vast and sophisticated that even FBI agent Patricia Green seemed shocked by its scope. As we moved through the construction site, I could hear Karen's voice echoing from the central building, not the desperate ravings of a cornered criminal, but the confident tones of someone conducting business as usual. She was on the phone with someone she called David, discussing timeline adjustments and profit projections as if she hadn't just kidnapped a special needs child. The lake property will be clear within 60 days, she was saying. Once we eliminate Carter and discredit his program, the community will have no choice but to accept our development proposal. My 15% ownership stake in the resort guarantees a return of $7.5 million, more than enough to cover the casino debts and establish the next phase of operations. But Karen wasn't just a small-town HOA president gone rogue. She was a key player in what FBI agent Green would later describe as the largest property fraud scheme in American history. The conversation I overheard revealed that Operation Lakefront had already succeeded in 23 other communities across 3 states, systematically targeting lakeside properties through HOA manipulation, false environmental claims, and intimidation, tactics that drove out residents and cleared the way for luxury development. Karen's method had been refined through years of practice. each community serving as a testing ground for increasingly sophisticated fraud techniques that generated hundreds of millions in illegal profits for Emerald Bay Development Corporation and its network of local conspirators. The biggest shock came when I discovered that Marcus Webb, the supposed thug who'd led Karen's fake police operation, was actually an undercover FBI informant who'd been gathering evidence on the conspiracy for 8 months. "I'm sorry I couldn't break cover earlier," Daniel Webb whispered as we coordinated Tommy's rescue. "But your case finally gave us everything we needed to bring down the entire network. Karen's been so focused on your lake that she's exposed connections we've been trying to trace for years." Webb's wire recordings had captured not just Karen's local crimes, but her communications with Emerald Bay executives, Canadian money launderers, and corrupt officials in multiple states who'd facilitated the property seizures that funded the entire operation. The rescue of Tommy became a moment of triumph that transcended the immediate tactical situation, revealing the true power of the therapeutic connections I'd built through my swimming program. When I found the boy locked in a construction trailer, he wasn't cowering in terror, but practicing the breathing exercises I'd taught him during our swimming lessons. "Daniel," he called out when he saw me, "I remembered what you said about staying calm in deep water. Even scary places can't drown you, if you keep breathing steady." His courage in the face of kidnapping reminded me why I'd started the Swim to Heal program in the first place. Not just to teach swimming techniques, but to build confidence and resilience in children who face daily challenges that would break most adults. Karen's final desperate gambit involved taking Tommy hostage in front of news cameras that she'd somehow summoned to the construction site, apparently believing she could spin even a kidnapping into a public relations victory. This boy's safety is threatened by Daniel Carter's reckless program. She screamed at the assembled reporters holding Tommy. Against his will, while police surrounded the building. "I'm protecting him from a dangerous man who refuses proper oversight," but Tommy's response destroyed any credibility her performance might have generated. The 14-year-old boy looking directly into the camera and saying with perfect clarity, "This lady is lying. Daniel teaches us to be brave and strong. She's the scary one." The moment was captured by Emily's live stream, which had grown to over 2 million viewers worldwide, turning a local property dispute into an international symbol of resistance against corporate corruption. FBI agent Patricia Green's revelation about the true scope of the conspiracy provided the final pieces of a puzzle that stretched from our small lakeside community to corporate boardrooms in Toronto and money laundering operations in the Cayman Islands. Karen Whitfield is what we call a local facilitator in an international property seizure network, Green explained as we watched Karen being arrested on live television. Emerald Bay Development Corporation has been systematically targeting American lakefront communities using local HOA corruption to clear properties that are then developed into luxury resorts marketed to foreign investors. Your lake was supposed to be the flagship property in a portfolio worth over $800 million. The arrests that followed would eventually include Emerald Bay's CEO, 3 Canadian government officials, and corrupt HOA leaders in 14 states. But the most satisfying moment of the entire ordeal came when Karen's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely, revealing the broken, desperate woman beneath the polished exterior. As federal agents placed her in handcuffs, she looked directly at me and said, "I was like you once, Daniel. I lost everything to an HOA that destroyed my family and stole my home. I swore I'd never be powerless again, but I became the monster that once hurt me." Her confession carried genuine remorse mixed with the kind of psychological damage that explained without excusing how a victim of corruption had transformed into its architect. The tragedy of Karen Whitfield wasn't just her crimes, but the way trauma had twisted her desire for security into a compulsion to control and exploit others. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as agents processed evidence that would ultimately recover $47 million for defrauded homeowners and result in prison sentences totaling over 200 years for the conspirators. Karen herself faced 7 years in federal prison, plus complete financial restitution, while the Emerald Bay executives would likely never see freedom again. But for May, the real victory was watching Tommy Stone reunite with his mother. Both of them, safe and surrounded by a community that had finally seen through Karen's lies to embrace the truth about what we'd built together beside our precious lake. The emergency federal hearing at the county courthouse turned into a media circus that dwarfed anything our small lakeside community had ever witnessed, with satellite trucks from major networks lined up around the building and Emily's live stream attracting viewers from 14 different countries. Federal Judge Catherine Morrison had flown in from the district court to oversee what Agent Patricia Green described as the largest property fraud prosecution in the history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with residents who'd spent months choosing sides in what they thought was a simple HOA dispute now watching in stunned silence as evidence of an international conspiracy unfolded before their eyes. Margaret Stone sat in the front row, clutching Tommy's hand. Both of them still processing the trauma of his kidnapping while simultaneously witnessing the complete vindication of everything I'd been fighting for since that first fake fine hit me in the face. The simultaneous arrests that morning had been choreographed with military precision, FBI agents and Royal Canadian Mounted Police coordinating raids across 3 time zones to prevent evidence destruction and flight risks. David Thornton, CEO of Emerald Bay Development Corporation, was arrested at Toronto Pearson Airport, attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with suitcases full of cash and falsified documents. His computer hard drives, seized during the raid on Emerald Bay's headquarters, contained detailed records of property seizures spanning 5 years and involving over 300 American communities. The scope was breathtaking in its audacity. Asystematic looting of lakefront properties that had generated nearly $3 billion in illegal profits while displacing thousands of families who'd had their homes stolen through manufactured HOA crises and fraudulent legal proceedings. Judge Morrison's presentation of evidence felt like watching a masterclass in federal prosecution, each document and recording building an airtight case that even Karen's expensive attorney couldn't challenge. Margaret's wire recordings were played in their entirety, Karen's voice filling the courtroom as she confessed to forging signatures, embezzling community funds, and conspiring with foreign nationals to defraud American property owners. "The casino debts were crushing me," Karen's recorded voice explained, with casual indifference to the families she destroyed. "But David promised me financial security forever if I could deliver these lakefront communities to Emerald Bay. We'd done it successfully in 23 other locations, so one more shouldn't have been difficult." The recordings revealed not just individual crimes, but a comprehensive business model built on exploiting American property law loopholes and HOA governance weaknesses. Marcus Webb's testimony as an FBI informant provided the final pieces of evidence needed to connect local fraud to international money laundering. His 8 months undercover yielding intelligence that would eventually lead to arrests in 6 countries. "Mrs. Whitfield recruited me, believing I was just muscle for hire," Webb testified, his voice steady, despite the obvious difficulty of maintaining his cover for so long. But every conversation was recorded, every meeting documented, every financial transaction traced through channels the Bureau had been monitoring for years. The fake police operation was actually the smallest part of a scheme that included bribed local officials, forged environmental reports, and systematic intimidation of property owners who refused to sell. His testimony revealed that I'd been targeted not just because of my lakes' value, but because my military background and community connections made me a particularly challenging obstacle to their usual tactics. The community's reaction to these revelations was as dramatic as any courtroom scene. Neighbors who'd spent months believing Karen's lies about my dangerous program now scrambled to apologize and show support. Sarah Martinez stood up in the middle of proceedings to address the court directly, her voice breaking with emotion as she described how Javier had thrived through swimming therapy while Karen was secretly planning to destroy the program that had given her son his first real chance at independence. "Your Honor," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Daniel Carter saved my child's life while that woman was plotting to steal our homes and destroy our community. We were fools to believe her lies, but we'll spend the rest of our lives making up for that mistake." Her spontaneous testimony sparked a wave of similar statements from other parents, transforming what had been a divided community into a unified voice, demanding justice and supporting the program that had brought healing to so many families. Karen's final courtroom breakdown was both pathetic and terrifying, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely as the weight of evidence made denial impossible. When Judge Morrison asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Karen rose unsteadily and launched into a rambling speech that revealed the full extent of her psychological damage. "I was Daniel Carter once," she said, her voice alternating between whispers and shouts. "I had a home, a family, a life that an HOA destroyed through lies and legal manipulation. I swore I'd never be powerless again, never let anyone steal from me what those people stole. But somewhere along the way, I became them. I became the monster that destroyed innocent families, just like mine was destroyed." Her confession carried genuine remorse mixed with delusional justification, acknowledging guilt while simultaneously blaming her victims for not being strong enough to fight back against her schemes. The sentences handed down that afternoon represented the largest financial recovery in property fraud history, with Judge Morrison ordering complete restitution for all victims, plus punitive damages that would fund a new federal task force dedicated to HOA oversight and reform. Karen received 7 years in federal prison plus $2.3 million in personal restitution, while David Thornton and his Canadian co-conspirators faced life sentences without possibility of parole. Robert Steinberg, the corrupt attorney who tried to intimidate me with frivolous lawsuits, was disbarred and sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for his role in the conspiracy. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Morrison declared all of Karen's HOA actions null and void, formally restoring my property rights and granting federal protection to the Swim to Heal program under new legislation designed to prevent future attempts at therapeutic program disruption. The immediate aftermath of the sentencing felt like a community-wide awakening, neighbors who'd been manipulated by Karen's fear tactics suddenly understanding how close they'd come to losing everything. To an international crime syndicate. Margaret Stone was elected as the new HOA president by unanimous vote, her first official act being the implementation of new bylaws that protected individual property rights and required transparent financial reporting for all community expenditures. The community fund was not only restored through federal recovery efforts, but supplemented by donations from supporters around the world who'd followed Emily's live stream coverage of our fight against corporate corruption. Local news coverage turned into national attention, then international recognition as our story became a symbol of individual courage, standing up against systematic abuse of power. The personal victory was even sweeter than the legal one. Watching Tommy Stone address the courtroom with confidence I'd never seen in him before. Karen Whitfield tried to hurt me because she was scared of my dad's friend, Daniel. Tommy said, "His autism no longer a barrier to clear communication, but simply another aspect of who he was. But Daniel taught me to be brave in scary situations, and now I want to help other kids learn to be brave too." His statement brought tears to the eyes of the courtroom, including Judge Morrison's, and served as perfect evidence of why the Swim to Heal program deserved not just legal protection, but federal funding and expansion. The boy who'd been kidnapped as a pawn in Karen's desperate scheme had transformed into an advocate for special needs children everywhere. His courage inspiring legislation that would protect therapeutic programs from future corporate interference. As we left the courthouse that evening, surrounded by supporters and news crews documenting our victory, I received a phone call that would change the direction of my life forever. Agent Patricia Green's voice carried excitement, mixed with professional urgency as she explained that our case had opened investigations into similar fraud schemes in 47 states. Daniel, we need civilian consultants who understand both military tactics and community dynamics. She said, your combination of investigative skills and therapeutic work with special populations makes you uniquely qualified to help us protect other communities from what almost happened to yours. Would you consider working with the FBI to prevent future Operation Lakefront situations? The opportunity to turn our personal victory into a nationwide movement for property rights and community protection was too important to ignore. But first, I had promises to keep to the children who'd trusted me with their hopes and fears in the safe waters of our family lake. 6 months after the trials ended, I stood on the dock of what was now officially designated as the Swim to Heal National Training Center, watching 25 autistic children from 7 different states splash and laugh in the crystal clear water that Karen Whitfield had tried so desperately to steal from them. The federal grant of $500,000 had transformed my family's simple therapy program into a model facility that researchers from Johns Hopkins and UCLA were studying as a breakthrough in autism treatment methodology. Emily, now 13 and confident beyond her years, worked beside me as a certified junior instructor. Her experience live-streaming our battle against corruption, having prepared her for a lifetime of advocacy and leadership. The girl who'd hidden in willow trees to document injustice had grown into a young woman who understood that sometimes the most important fights happen in your own backyard, but their effects can change the world. The national impact of our case had exceeded everyone's expectations, sparking congressional hearings that led to the passage of Daniel's Law in 23 states, legislation that protected homeowners from HOA abuse and established federal oversight of community association governance. Senator Elizabeth Warren had personally invited me to testify about property rights and veteran services, turning our lakeside drama into a catalyst for nationwide reform that would protect millions of families from the kind of systematic fraud that had nearly destroyed our community. The FBI's Property Fraud Task Force, funded partly through recoveries from the Emerald Bay prosecutions, had already prevented similar schemes in 47 communities, saving an estimated $200 million in property and preserving homes for thousands of American families who never knew how close they'd come to losing everything. Tommy Stone had become the unofficial poster child for autism advocacy. His transformation from kidnapping victim to confident public speaker, inspiring documentary filmmakers and special education professionals across the country. At 18 now, he'd received a full scholarship to study aquatic therapy at the University of Miami, with plans to establish similar programs internationally after graduation. Daniel didn't just teach me to swim. Tommy told the Netflix documentary crew filming our story. He taught me that being different doesn't mean being weak, and that sometimes the people who try to hurt you are really just scared of what you represent. His eloquence and insight had helped shift public perception of autism from limitation to potential, showing that, with proper support and understanding, special needs children could not only overcome their challenges, but also become leaders and advocates for others facing similar struggles. Margaret Stone's transformation from reluctant HOA treasurer to nationally recognized expert on community governance had been equally dramatic in her testimony before Congress, leading to new federal guidelines that required transparency and accountability in homeowner association operations. She'd written a book about her experience as an unwitting accomplice to Karen's fraud, forged signatures, how I helped save my community by nearly destroying it, which had become required reading and business ethics courses at several major universities. Margaret's relationship with our family had deepened beyond friendship into something resembling kinship, holidays, and birthdays celebrated together around the lake that had brought us all together in the first place. Her courage in wearing that wire and gathering evidence had saved not just our community, but potentially hundreds of others, targeted by similar schemes. The romantic subplot that had developed between Rebecca Foster and me had blossomed into the Kind of partnership I'd never thought possible after losing Emily's mother to cancer 5 years earlier. Dr. Foster had joined our program as clinical director, bringing pediatric therapy expertise that elevated our methods from effective folk wisdom to evidence-based medical treatment. Her gentle strength and professional competence complemented my military background and intuitive understanding of childhood trauma, creating a therapeutic environment that attracted visiting researchers and inspired similar programs nationwide. Emily's approval of our relationship had been crucial. Her 12-year-old wisdom recognizing that Rebecca made me smile in ways I hadn't since her mother's death. Dad deserves to be happy. Emily had announced during one of our family dinners, and Rebecca makes him laugh at stupid jokes again. Karen Whitfield's story had taken a different trajectory, her 7-year federal sentence becoming an opportunity for genuine rehabilitation rather than simple punishment. Prison psychologists working with her case had diagnosed complex PTSD related to her own victimization by HOA fraud, helping her understand how trauma had twisted her desire for security into a compulsion to control and exploit others. Her letters to me, which arrived monthly despite my lack of response, showed a gradual progression from self-justification to genuine remorse, and finally to a desire for redemption. I understand now that I became the monster that once destroyed me. Her most recent letter read, "I can't undo the harm I caused, but perhaps my story can help others recognize the warning signs of trauma-induced corruption before it destroys more families like it destroyed mine." The international implications of our case continued to unfold. As investigators traced Emerald Bay's connections to similar fraud operations in Canada, Australia, and several European countries, where lakefront property theft had become a systematic problem. David Thornton's life sentence had been upheld on appeal, but his cooperation with international authorities had led to the recovery of over $47 million for victims worldwide and the establishment of new treaties designed to prevent cross-border property crime. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police had created a specialized unit-based honor investigations methodology. While Interpol was using our case as a model for combating international real estate fraud, our small community's fight for justice had literally changed how the world approached property crime and community protection. The personal satisfaction of watching former opponents become allies never got old, particularly when Sarah Martinez stood up at town meetings to publicly support program expansions that would serve even more special needs families. The woman who'd once been offered money to lie about my program had become one of its most passionate advocates, her son Javier now serving as a peer mentor for newly enrolled children. "Daniel saved my son when I was too scared to trust him," Sarah often said during fundraising events. "Now I spend every day making sure other families don't make the same mistake I almost made." Her transformation from frightened parent to fierce advocate embodied the broader community healing that had followed Karen's exposure and arrest. As evening approached and the last of the day's therapy sessions concluded, I found myself floating peacefully in the center of the lake that had started this entire journey, surrounded by the sounds of children playing safely on the shores there, families now owned free and clear. My radio crackled with a familiar voice. Agent Patricia Green calling with news about another community under threat from systematic HOA fraud. Another opportunity to use the skills and knowledge I'd gained through our ordeal to protect families I'd never met. "Daniel, we've got a situation in Montana that looks exactly like what Karen tried to do to your community." Green's voice carried the urgency that had become familiar over the past 6 months. 300 families at risk, international money involved, and local authorities who seem compromised. "You interested in consulting on this one?" I smiled and continued floating, watching Emily and Tommy teach a group of younger children the breathing exercises that had once helped him survive kidnapping. "Let me finish this session first, Patricia," I replied. "These kids have waited all week for their swimming lesson, and some promises are more important than others." The radio fell silent as the sun set over water that would remain free and clear for generations to come, Protected by laws our courage had inspired and defended by a community that had learned to recognize truth from manipulation. This wasn't just about one lake anymore. It was about every family's right tossed up against abuse of power. And that fight would continue as long as bullies existed. And communities needed heroes willing to take the first brave step into deep water. Sometimes standing up to bullies starts with one person refusing to back down. But it takes a whole community to create real change. Our fight against Karen's corruption proved that courage is contagious. And when good people unite, even international, crime syndicates can't win. If this story inspired you to stand up for what's right in your own community, hit that like button and subscribe to Happer Stories. Every share helps spread these messages of hope and reminds others that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary justice when they refuse to let fear